We're loading the room.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Hi, Neil.
Thanks for joining us tonight. We're just, our people are just joining the webinar right now. And we can't see them, of course, but they can hear us and see us. So I guess we'll all be on very entertaining tonight. As people are joining the meeting, I just want to say before we start that we would like to acknowledge the traditional ancestral Indigenous territory and territories on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. And I'd also like to make mention that every individual has a right to dignity and respect within the union and within the workplace. Creating and preserving a safe, harassment-free environment at all union activities, events, and meetings is our collective responsibility. As such, Unifor anti-harassment policies will be in effect for this meeting and this space. I do want to just address the participants tonight. I see we're up over 50, so people are coming into the room. You can see us, myself, and the panelists, and we can't see you, but this is part of the process. We like to make this as anonymous as possible, and so that you have the freedom to ask any single question that you want to this panel of experts. So, you know, we really want you to feel free to ask any questions. And so we have two modes for you to do that. The most sensical one is a Q&A button. If you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A, and you can type your question in there, and I will monitor that on a regular basis and bring the questions to the panelists if they haven't already answered them. And the other way, of course, we do have a chat, more for comments. We can try to please put the questions in the Q&A, but if you have some comments and something you'd like to share with the group, you can put that into the chat. And so I think we're getting the room loaded, and we are about ready to start. I think we're going to just give each of our panelists just a minute just to tell them about themselves. So I'll start with Dr. John Oyston.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. So I'm actually a medical doctor. My specialty is anesthesiology, which isn't particularly relevant to COVID, but never mind. I did work in Scarborough General Hospital through the SARS crisis, so I have that first experience of at least one virus. But since I retired, I've been involved in various issues related to COVID. I worked with Toronto Public Health, leading a team of medical contact tracers for a while, and I've been involved with this program for a while, and I think this is about the 20th one of these I've done. Also at lunchtime today, I was at a webinar with the Royal College, and so I'm full of the latest information from that group.
Thanks very much. We appreciate that. I'll just go in order of which I saw them. Miss Iman Thind, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Iman Thind, and I have a background and I have a Master's of Public Health, and I have been involved with COVID-19 Resources Canada since January. I have been answering questions from individuals from from very diverse backgrounds, and I take a particular interest in trying my best to create spaces in which people feel most comfortable to answer questions, and addressing any concerns they might have about not just about the information we're providing, but also any concerns about why they should believe what we're saying and why we should be trusted in general.
Thanks very much. And we'll go to Dr. Neil Den Hollander.
Neil for short. Much easier to say. Again, my name is Neil Den Hollander. I'm a PhD immunologist. I started off my career a long time ago in public health. I spent more than a decade with public health, and then moved over to the University Health Network, where I was the medical director of the transplant lab there. So for kidneys, hearts, lungs, livers, bone marrow for not only Toronto General, Princess Margaret, but also St. Michael's Hospital and the Hospital for Sick Children. So all of the transplants that happen in the Toronto area, and I've been, well, obviously involved in immunology literally in my entire life. I can't think of a time when I wasn't thinking immunology, maybe as a child, but certainly even through high school, I was interested in immunology.
Thank you. Unmute. Thank you very much for that, for introducing yourselves, and thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm going to start with a question in the chat. How safe are vaccines for a person who has lupus?
I'll have the first go at that if you like. It's safe. So the vaccines that we have available at the moment, there are almost no contraindications to the vaccines. The only thing we're really a little bit concerned about is people who've had an anaphylactic response to a previous vaccine or to any of the components of the vaccine. So people are a little bit concerned about stuff called polyethylene glycol or polysorbate. But apart from that, for medical conditions, there's really nothing. People with diabetes, immunosuppression, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, people with high blood pressure, people with rheumatoid arthritis. I can't think there's a single thing where if you have this medical condition, you shouldn't get the vaccines.
I would completely concur with that. Systemic lupus erythematosus, I mean, it's obviously a pretty serious disease. Hopefully, people who have it are in remission to a large extent. But even if they're not, having the vaccine, even under active disease, should not impede in any major sort of way your immune system from responding to the vaccine and giving the kind of protection that you're looking for against this particular virus.
Thanks very much. I see there's a question in the chat. I think it's kind of related, so I'll ask it now. I have a history 2 times 15 years apart of idiopathic blood clots in my lungs. Should I be concerned about vaccines, particularly AstraZeneca? And I do have other questions about AstraZeneca and blood clots, so very fitting timing for that.
So there has been concern about blood clots with AstraZeneca, and the situation is still not entirely clear. In Britain, they've given 11 million people AstraZeneca vaccine without having any blood clotting problems. In Europe, they have had people, and there's been a very small number of people who've had some very strange things, cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is a blood clot in the brain. And it appears that it's possible that that is actually happening more commonly than one would expect by chance. But the risk of getting that compared to the risk of getting thrombosis due to COVID, if you're worried about getting thrombosis, you're much better getting the vaccine and not getting COVID. One researcher I spoke to said the risk of delaying for a week your vaccine is 5 times greater than the risk of getting one of these complications from the vaccine. So the situation is not entirely resolved, but everybody like the European Medicines Association, the WHO, Health Canada, are all saying that overall the vaccine is safe and effective. People should get the vaccine, and the risk of any complications is way, 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 way smaller than the risk of getting complications from COVID.
Again, I would agree completely. I mean, certainly there's a lot of documented evidence that there's a significant number of individuals that have come down with clotting problems with the advent of the actual disease, not the vaccine. That's a very, very small number. It's a rather unique kind of clotting, especially, in the brain area. Whereas with COVID-19, the actual virus and the infection, that leads much more to a more significant and certainly much higher numbers of individuals that have clotting issues, including some issues, in fact, with, almost a contradiction in the sense of a lowering of your platelet count. So both of those events have been associated with the virus. And again, I would strongly encourage people to weigh that kind of risk-benefit analysis. The vaccine is much, much, much safer than, well, by orders of magnitude, than having you contract an actual infection with this particular virus.
Thanks. And I see that even you've written some comments in the chat. They're going only to the panelists, so you can switch that so they can actually go to the panelists and the participants. But
sorry, I didn't realize.
Yeah, I know. all these little WebEx, Zoom details.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So you can switch that, but essentially, she's saying, the lifetime risk of getting struck by lightning is 1 in 3,000. So only 25 and 20 million people who received the AstraZeneca reported the issues that created these concerns.
That's approximately that. I think it's 25 to 30-ish. I but long scheme of numbers doesn't make a difference. That precise, that doesn't make a difference. That 20 million is a very, very high number.
Okay, I'll go to the next question, just the one in the chat. Does the vaccine see or change any parts of our DNA?
There's a short answer and a long answer, and the long answer is no, and the short answer is no. I'm not to make a joke of it. This is a serious concern that a lot of people have. But I can assure you that neither the mRNA vaccine, that is the Moderna and or Pfizer vaccines, which are an mRNA vaccine, do not integrate in any way, shape, or form with your own DNA. The RNA, in fact, doesn't even leave the cytoplasm. It goes to the cytoplasm and goes directly to the ribosomes, which is a component of your cell that then converts that message, if you will, that nucleic acid message into actually creating the protein, which your body then will recognize as being foreign, and you'll mount an immune response. The other vaccines, both the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca, are DNA based, but again, those are been constructed in such a fashion that again, they cannot integrate with your own DNA. They simply go in, and mRNA is made from them. So they're going in as a double-stranded DNA. They will become single-stranded, make a single-stranded copy of mRNA, which then again goes to the ribosomes. The proteins are made, and again, your immune system is going to recognize that as foreign. And again, protection is, as has been clearly demonstrated in all of the, not only the phase 3 trials, but in real-world data by literally millions of individuals who have had these vaccines and are showing strong immune responses, both at the, not too technical for you, but basically at both the B cell and the T cell levels. And that is basically the cells that kill infected cells, as well as other cells that actually make a thing called antibodies, which interfere with the virus in attacking and attaching onto receptors, and thus preventing the infection that way. So again, neither the messenger RNA or the DNA vaccines in any way, shape, or form integrate with your own DNA. And in fact, both are destroyed quite rapidly, matter of days downstream after having had the vaccine. So they're actually out of your body within days. Now, the immune response will stay for much longer, but the actual products that led to that immune response, the messenger RNA and the DNA, gone within a fairly short period of time.
Thanks for that. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I just say, first of all,
sure.
It's my turn to agree with Neil. And secondly, to give people an analogy, which makes it maybe a little bit simpler, is it's like in a restaurant, and there's the menu, and there's the recipe the chef uses. And when the waitress comes and takes your order, she scratches a few little notes about what you want on a piece of paper, and she takes that to the chef, and the chef reads it, cooks it, and throws it away. So the message is a temporary thing. It doesn't affect the menu. It doesn't affect the recipes. It's just a way of communicating.
Great analogy. Great. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
Pardon me. I have a very quick question/comment. Is it possible for me to screen share at any point? It's been disabled currently.
I don't know, but if my Unifor webinar one person is listening, I might be able to figure that out, or when we are answering the next question, I'll see what my skill level is at that. I saw a question in the chat. There was two of them. There was one about what's the difference between the manufactured vaccines, and I think you went into that a little bit. But then also they asked about the side effects. Do they differ from vaccine to vaccine? Is it the same for all of them? Who wants to take that one on?
I'm happy to, but if you want to go, John.
No, that's fine. You go.
Basically, the side effects are not so much a factor of the vaccine so much as it is the actual individual and their own physiology. Most of the side effects are in the area of basically soreness, a little bit of redness at the site of the injection. And all of the vaccines have had those kinds of side effects, but it's not so much an issue of the actual vaccine itself, so much as your own physiology and how your body will react to foreign material coming into the system. None of the vaccines, as opposed to other vaccines that all of us have had, have something called an adjuvant. And an adjuvant is a material or additional parts of the vaccine which are specifically designed to enhance the immune system. And a lot of those will have a much stronger at the site of injection kind of response or reaction. None of the current vaccines that are approved for use in Canada have an adjuvant associated with them. Basically, we're talking about some salts, some sugars, some fats, basically around either the messenger RNA or in the case of the DNA vaccine, it's coming in with a crippled adenovirus. But other than those sorts of things, you're not likely to see anything other than, again, that very temporary soreness, redness, and those sorts of things. And again, that is really dependent on many, in fact, most individuals don't have a reaction at all. But those that do have a reaction, that's the sort of thing that they are the most typical kinds of things of a side reaction. Do you want to add to that, John?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
All right, I guess my next question will be about the Pfizer vaccine, that people are being told that the recommended use is you get your second shot within 4 weeks, and people are now being advised that they'll be waiting 4 months. What's your take on that? Is there a risk?
So Pfizer, and please, anybody who else wants to jump in, go ahead. But Pfizer basically was developed with a 3-week period of time between the first dose and the second dose. The Moderna, I believe, was between 4 weeks and 12 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just confirm that. Moderna, there you go, 2 weeks, blah, 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 blah. No. Anyway, I'll look it up in a minute, but basically, the vaccines do have a period of time, even in their trials, in which the second dose was given. So it wasn't given exclusively within that, what is now being recommended as the second dose. Having said that, both manufacturers, well, in fact, all of the manufacturers are strongly advising, as they should, to follow the science. And the science basically says, this is what we've done in our phase 3 trials. Therefore, we're going to recommend to all countries, Canada included, to follow those guidelines. That makes an awful lot of sense because that's where the science was done and that's what the science has indicated. However, especially places like Canada, where we've had a significant delay in getting vaccines into the country, there's a balancing act of, should we be protecting a larger group of individuals, which then protects all of us eventually, by delaying that second dose by a few weeks. So again, in some cases, it's been as long as 4 months, although that's, may in fact be shortened as more and more vaccines come into the country. But be that as it may, even if it were 4 months, while that might be outside of what the manufacturers are suggesting because of the science that they have done, certainly in terms of the immunology, as well as many trials that have done in animals and in fact in other humans over many other vaccines, this kind of delay is not likely to impact in any major sort of way the secondary response that your immune system is likely to develop in response to that second dose of the vaccine. The manufacturers cannot, for legal reasons, not medical reasons, but for legal reasons, cannot in any way, shape, or form suggest that they should do anything other than follow what they have in fact done in their actual phase 3 trials. So we can't blame or point fingers at the manufacturers. They're only doing what they're legally allowed to say. But from a medical point of view, I think it behooves all of us to understand that Health Canada and our National Advisory on Immunization, that committee, NACI, basically are individuals who don't have any kind of issues with providing strong and clear recommendations based on the science. They're not, well, they may or may not have, stocks in any of these forms. I suspect they don't, otherwise they'd have to declare it. But nevertheless, my point being is that those individuals are making these decisions based on science and immunology and medical reasons and not for anything else. So I think it behooves us to basically trust, maybe not the manufacturer in this particular case, but the National Advisory Committee, who have nothing other than pure science and medical as what's driving them to make these decisions and make these recommendations. It is really a public health question, not so much as a what the manufacturer is recommending. We in Canada simply don't have the amount of vaccine in the country to give everybody the kind of dosaging that the manufacturers are recommending. We are making a public health decision to get everybody or as many people as vaccinated as we possibly can, because that benefits all of us in the long run.
Thanks.
Yes, again, to agree completely with Neil, that's good. And Britain has led the way in this, right? They were the first people to start doing this, and they're actually getting very good results, and their COVID numbers are coming down very nicely. And to give you the personal aspect of it, I got the AstraZeneca vaccine 10 days ago, and I've been booked to have my second shot 90 days after my first dose, and I'm completely happy about that. And I was on this conference call at lunchtime, and one of the virologists said that generally for a vaccine, if you're going to do 2 doses, there's no point giving the second dose within 2 weeks because the body hasn't had a proper response to the first. But anything from 3 weeks to about 6 months is fair game. And one of the things you reminded me is when I had my shingles vaccine, you get the first dose of shingles vaccine, and the second one is between 2 and 6 months after the first one. So this is fairly common practice with other vaccines.
I noticed we actually have a question about the shingles vaccine. Somebody said they got their shingles vaccine shot yesterday. How can I still get vaccinated for COVID?
I think the recommendation is to wait 2 weeks. Is that right, Neil?
Yes, I would certainly recommend waiting at least 2 weeks between the 2 vaccinations.
All right. I have another question, and it's really, I think it's a bit of confusion, but it's somebody saying I received the Pfizer vaccine. I'm 95% protected against getting COVID. Does that mean I only have a 5% chance of transferring COVID? And what do we know about transferring COVID if you're fully vaccinated?
Basically, the 95% efficacy rate is really talking about the individuals that were there in the phase 3 trial. Having said that, let's go back to the individuals who actually had the vaccine. The individuals who had the vaccine anywhere here in Canada, or in fact anywhere in the world, whether it's Pfizer, Moderna, or anything else, regardless of what those initial numbers may say in terms of efficacy, you are still quite capable, as far as we know at this stage, of contracting the virus. You won't get sick, or at least, virtually 100% you won't die or have serious disease with all of the vaccines that are currently licensed for use in Canada, but you might end up with a mild disease. You might just sort of not even know it as being a coronavirus sort of thing. You might just say, I got the sniffles, I got a cold, whatever, and slough it off as not being particularly important. And we do that all the time, and all of us presumably have done that over the years. And that's the critical component of this, is that you could still therefore be shedding virus and infecting others who may not have had the benefit that you've had of having a vaccination. So it's very important that all of us, vaccinated or not, maintain social distancing, maintain masking, to make sure that those individuals who haven't received the vaccine are equally well protected as much as we can with our public health interventions, as opposed to just the vaccine intervention. So I think that's incredibly important. And I think all of us, in respect and our love for our fellow human beings, follow those guidelines. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think that at the moment, while there's still so many people out there unvaccinated, and while we don't have proper real scientific evidence about the effect of vaccination on transmission rates, that was something that wasn't actually studied in the first trials, because it would have just made the trials more complicated, and they just wanted to get a quick result about the effectiveness of the vaccines in preventing disease. So at the moment, public health and the general advice is to still be very cautious about what you do. But I think that may change as we get more data, and also as we get a higher percentage of the population vaccinated.
Thank you very much for that, John. I agree completely.
Thanks. I'm going to ask next about the vaccine infertility. And I've heard this both for men and for women. Does it affect fertility?
No. Next question. All
right.
Sadly, somebody from Pfizer made some totally bogus suggestion that there was something in the spike protein of the virus which was in some way related to some chemical that's needed for normal pregnancy. But the relationship is very vague. If that were true, that would mean getting COVID would also make you infertile, and it doesn't. There are plenty of people now, like in the tens of thousands, who have had the vaccine and then got pregnant and had an uneventful pregnancy. So this is just totally bogus misinformation.
Okay, thank you for that. And I've also had the question sent to me about pregnancy, and is there a better time during a pregnancy that you get vaccinated? First trimester versus second? Okay,
so the advice at the moment is you get vaccinated if you're pregnant. the risk of COVID if you're pregnant is really serious, right? Because you imagine how the effect of the uterus, it's a big thing. It actually physically prevents your lungs from moving. And also during pregnancy, you have a less good immune response. So it's very important that pregnant women should get vaccinated. Ideally, you get vaccinated before you get pregnant. That would be the perfect thing in an ideal world. They are now recommending that people get vaccinated no matter where they are in the stage of the pregnancy, or this first, second, or third trimester. My only caveat about that is that some pregnancies don't end up well. Okay, some people lose their babies. Some people, unfortunately, have babies born with abnormalities. And if you're the sort of person that if you got the COVID vaccine when you were 2 months pregnant, and then you either lost the baby or you had a malformed baby, there's absolutely no reason to believe that that was your fault. There's no reason to believe that that's caused by the vaccine, but it might haunt people. So on that basis alone, some people might not want to get it in the first trimester. But the recommendation is that all pregnant women should get the vaccine when it's available to them.
Sorry,
I would concur, and as well, we also know that many tens of thousands, if not more, became pregnant after they've had the vaccine. In fact, some of the phase 3 trials, some of those participants actually had babies after the end of the trial, so they were clearly pregnant during the trial, even though they didn't know it at the time because that was not part of the recruitment protocol. So they were trying to recruit people that were healthy and not pregnant, but some people ended up being pregnant anyway because they didn't know it at the time, and they delivered perfectly healthy babies. Now, again, real world data would suggest that there is no impact, and certainly from just sort of looking at the vaccines themselves and what's in them and what they contain, there should be no reason to suspect anything. But again, I think John's advice of, if you are thinking about getting pregnant, first trimester is frequently a more, what's the word I'm looking for, susceptible portion of the gestation periods. First trimester, second trimester, third trimester. And so you might want to consider, avoiding or at least delaying vaccination until later on in the pregnancy. Although again, preferably even before you get pregnant, that would be the ideal situation.
I see that somebody's asked, since we're talking about the subject, does the baby get some of the vaccine in vitro, and does this benefit the baby? Is that something that might be passed on?
That's literally almost impossible to happen. Certainly we know that, antibodies can cross the placenta and obviously are also present in breast milk. And certainly babies that have been born to individuals that are vaccinated would benefit from maternal antibodies, both in utero and also after birth through breast milk. So there's definitely going to be some protection with those passively transferred antibodies, for sure.
Thanks. Do we know if this vaccine is going to be yearly?
I'm sorry, going to be what?
Yearly. Annual.
Oh, annually. Sorry, yearly. Most likely not. And the reason why I say that is that this particular virus is not a particularly fast at changing its genetic code. It's an RNA virus. It's a positive strand RNA virus, if anybody's interested. But the point is that even though it's a very large virus, it has a fairly large genome. It isn't actually very mutagenic, so it's relatively stable. Having said that, clearly, if you have billions of copies of the virus, as we currently do, trillions, no, it's probably much bigger than that, probably, 10 to the very large number of virus particles out there in the human population, we're going to see some mutagenesis showing up as demonstrated by the various variants that we're seeing out there. But the virus left by itself on its own in a relatively small number of individuals is not going to be highly variable. It's not going to be highly mutagenic by itself. So it's not going to generate a large number of variants. Having said that, given that, I don't anticipate booster shots should they become necessary. And I think that they probably will become necessary sometime in the future. I'm anticipating that that's not likely to be an annual sort of thing. It's much more likely to be 2-3 years, that sort of thing. And it may well be that most individuals or maybe even whole countries will decide that the boosters, are not that necessary, because again, this might just become a relatively low-grade endemic infection, much like we have so many other low-grade endemic infections. It may require some boosters, but again, predicting the future is hard for everybody.
I have a question that was sent in by email, and they're asking about the, there's a number of people that obviously we had a lot of long-term care workers that tested positive that had COVID, but many were asymptomatic. And they've asked if I had COVID, but I was asymptomatic, does that not mean that I don't need the vaccine because, I had it, it didn't affect me, so it's not likely to affect me again?
There's a whole range of different answers that could be given from that, but not the least of which is that an asymptomatic infection doesn't necessarily mean that you've, elicited a strong immunological response to that infection. It may well be that your viral load that came in was fairly low and that your body beat it relatively quickly. So yes, you had the virus. Yes, you have some immunity to it. There's nothing to indicate from everything that we've seen so far, that guarantees that you have lifelong or even year-long or whatever number of months down the road protection against reinfection. We don't know about that for sure. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done about individuals that have been in contact with this particular virus, whether they can become reinfected. Certainly other coronaviruses, we know that that is definitely the case. You can become reinfected with coronaviruses. Whether that's true of this particular coronavirus, we don't know. But certainly the vaccine, we know where we're basically aiming the immune response to a very specific part of the virus, a part that the virus actually desperately needs to be able to do its thing, that is infect cells and ultimately replicate itself. And because we're targeting that immune response specifically against those spike proteins, so again, if you've seen some of the cartoons that are around where basically you're looking at a sphere with all these little pokey things around, those are the spike proteins. That's what the virus uses to actually attach to receptors on your own cells and then ultimately get inside. And the vaccine is really directed against those spikes, those little pokey things on the outside of the virus. And because of that very pointed amount of immune response to that critical component of the virus would protect you at a much higher level than, at least from a theoretical point of view, than an infection might have. Because again, then you're going to be making an immune response to all sorts and bits and pieces of the virus that may not be as critical for subsequent future infections. Again, I think that there's probably a lot of science that has to go behind that, and we're probably still investigating all of that. So everything that I've just said right now is theoretical, and there's ongoing studies, both from virtually all of the vaccine manufacturers, and I think we'll have much clearer answers to, what kind of protection individuals might have with the infection. But everything up until now would suggest that even with the infection, getting a vaccine is in your best interest.
And just the general advice to everybody at the moment is that even if you've had COVID, you should still get vaccinated. We know for sure that the vaccines work and that they give you good protection. We're less sure how good the protection is from having COVID. And the vaccines are a very controlled thing. We give you a specific dose of stuff, whereas if you just get the infection, there's an element of randomness in there. We don't want people to take the vaccine while they're still sick, either with COVID or with any other acute infection, but people who've had COVID should definitely still get vaccinated. That's the advice.
And a related question, how soon after having COVID can they get vaccinated?
Well, all right. I would suggest that, once you've had a couple of weeks of being asymptomatic, would be a reasonable degree of or period of time afterwards. But I would certainly recommend a minimum of a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, where you're totally asymptomatic. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, John.
Yeah, that seems fair. I don't know that there's good data on it, but
there isn't.
Certainly, we don't want people getting it while they're still acutely sick. Like if you're still running a fever and feeling ill, that's not a good time to develop an immune response to anything.
Okay, and I do have a question in the chat about type 1 diabetes, individuals with type 1 diabetes. Is that still safe to get the vaccine?
Yes, so diabetes, it's one of those things where the risk of having COVID is worse than a regular person. The risk of getting the vaccine is no different from anybody else. So the the benefit ratio to getting the vaccine is higher in people with diabetics. The same with people with high blood pressure, the same people with heart disease, the same people with people who are obese. So almost overwhelmingly, any condition you have, it may increase your risk if you have COVID, but it doesn't increase your risk from having the vaccine.
Thanks. I have a question. It's a general one for all panelists. What one point would you make with respect to those that advocate against vaccination?
I think that before making any point to them, or I completely understand where the question is coming from. I think that first I'd like to understand the reasons why they're concerned. Beyond that, like I think that it should be asked, that person who is concerned about vaccines should be having that conversation with a provider, a person with whom they feel most comfortable. For example, in my experience, as a racialized person, I feel more comfortable having that conversation with a person who is also someone from, my race, or someone who understands the historical reasons why people of color have these skepticism of medicine in general. So I think that there's billions of points that, I think could be made. And I think sometimes with certain people, the more you try to convince them, the more that they try to, they will come up with reasons for why they're right and you're wrong. So I think the only thing that you can do is try to come to, try to find mutual ground.
Anyone else have advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a physician, I can provide factual information to people. I can provide the risks and benefits. I can certainly talk about it being a public benefit, a benefit to their elderly parents, their community, and so forth. But in the end, there are going to be some people who, whose distrust of the medical profession is not going to be overcome by anything a white male doctor says.
And I guess from I agree with everything that everybody said so far, but, another aspect that I think is very important to recognize is that, I don't live by myself. I live in a community, and my community is part of even a larger community, and that community is part of even yet a larger community. And because I've made that decision to live in community, I have a personal responsibility to do things in my life that helps protect the things around me, the community around me. Simple things like wearing seatbelts. I may not like it. And if I lived by myself on an island somewhere and I couldn't hurt anybody else, I would probably still wear a seatbelt. But the point being is that there wouldn't be the same kind of obligation that I would feel in helping others or protecting others by doing those kinds of things. And I think that we collectively have individual responsibilities by having chosen to live in community that I think impacts on all of us to do things for our fellow human beings whom we've agreed to live with.
Agree.
And that sense of a collective responsibility is uniform across all religions and faiths in general.
Appreciate that. I have a few questions in the Q&A talking about a related, was this fast tracked? Was it studied long enough? This vaccine arrived far quicker than any other that we've normally seen. Can you sort of explain how that came about? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think all three of us have got more than a little bit of thought about this, and I think it's a valid concern because it's never happened before. And because it's never happened before, people are thinking, what the heck happened here? There must have been shortcuts. Otherwise, we would have been doing this a long time ago. No. One of the things that virtually all vaccines, or in fact all medicines, do is they go through a sequential step-by-step. So you do this first, then you do this, then you do the next thing, then you do the next thing. And that makes it in series. That's number one. One of the things that made this process so much more rapid than others is that they were done in parallel. So instead of being, end to end. They were done basically with overlapping. And that went all the way through, including, believe it or not, ramping up the manufacturing of the actual vaccine before distribution. So distribution is quite aside from everything else, but everything else, virtually everything else was done in parallel, not always starting at exactly the same point, but lots of things as they were going along were done in parallel. That's number one. Number two is that one of the things that really hampers the development of a vaccine is getting enough individuals in the two arms of the vaccine. So when you're developing a vaccine, you have to ask the question, well, is it safe and is it efficacious? And you do that in phase 1 and phase 2. And I don't want to get into too much detail of what phase 1 and phase 2 is, but phase 3, basically what you have is you have those two different populations, those that get the basically a placebo and those that actually get the vaccine. Recruiting individuals for a vaccine sometimes is a very long process. Well, in fact, almost always is a long process. In this particular case, people were beating down their doors, sign me up, placenta or otherwise, just sign me up. So they basically had all of the individuals, and it's like we're talking 30, 40,000 individuals in these phase 3 trials that were being done, and both arms filled up extremely rapidly. The other thing that tends to slow down a vaccine development is looking at the difference between the placebo group and the vaccinated group. Sometimes that takes months to years to see a statistically significant difference between those two groups. They saw the differences in weeks. Literally after the development or the inoculation of the vaccine, the difference between the placebo group and the vaccinated group, almost in virtual time, was instantaneous. It was literally a matter of weeks before they started seeing very significant differences in terms of protection. Placebo people got sick, vaccinated people did not. Plain and simple. So again, that process, which in other vaccines can take a huge amount of time, went very, very rapidly for all sorts of good real world reasons. Another small or minor point, a lot of vaccines are dependent on cash inflow because there's a lot of things that have to happen all at the same time. They were not short of money. There was money pouring in from governments and all sorts of other places. So all of those things combined, getting recruiting individuals for the test, running things in parallel, looking for the difference between the placebo and the vaccinated group, as well as doing all the paperwork and the regulatory kinds of things that you have to do, takes time and effort, but they had all of that almost handed to them in a platter. So yes, it was rapid. Did they take shortcuts? Absolutely not. This was done extremely safely with all of the safeguards in place. It's just that everything lined up perfectly to move it forward in a very rapid fashion.
And again, this is getting tedious. I'm agreeing with everything Neil says. But just to add on a couple of points, one of the things you have to give credit to the Chinese for is that they got the genetic sequence of the virus done very early. I think that was January of last year, and they immediately made that public. So people knew exactly what they were looking for a vaccine against. And the other thing is the regulators were prepared to do what they call a rolling review. Normally, when you do a scientific study, you have to wait until everybody has completed the study and you've waited 2 months to find out the outcome. And then you write up a report and then you send it to the regulatory authorities. With this, they did a rolling review, which they said, okay, we need 30,000 people in the study. Send us the results of the first 10,000. We'll check that out. We'll understand your reporting structure. We'll understand how you're doing your research. And then you can give us the rest as you go along. And so that means that when you come to almost finishing the study, we can predict exactly how it's going to go because we've got 3/4 of the data. And so we can start thinking already about what our next step is going to be. So the regulators also deserve a lot of credit for being prepared to do that.
I think that this question is the same as an upcoming question, which is, just a moment. Well, actually, now I can't find it. Never mind.
There was a couple that I kind of combined
Okay, yeah.
the same track. So I did see them, but it is hard to find one when you're looking for one. Just a quick one, impact on someone with MS. Should get the vaccine. I'm assuming that's their.
Yep. Same as pretty much everybody else with a chronic illness. Yeah, maybe not if you're in the middle of an acute exacerbation. Like if you're acutely sick with something, that's not a good time to get a vaccine. But if you're stable, you're in remission, you're between episodes, get the vaccine now.
Okay. I've been asked about the difference between SARS, COVID-19, MERS, and maybe even I've also been asked previously, why is this so much more effective than the flu shot?
Neil?
Flu shots are ineffective because one of the things that I mentioned a little bit earlier about how stable the genome is of coronavirus is the same is not true of the influenza virus. So the influenza virus is very, very prone to mutations and changes its coat, if you will, literally and figuratively, very, very rapidly. And so, you know, the vaccines that we make are a prediction as to what's likely to be the dominant strains somewhere in the future, usually 6 to 8 months down the road. And that prediction, as I've already indicated, predicting the future is hard. We frequently get it wrong, including making of vaccines for things like the influenza virus. So its efficacy rate is dependent on, you know, a lot of luck factors as to which strains become dominant. And again, we don't know that. There are literally hundreds of strains out there, and most of the flu vaccines basically target 3, 4, sometimes 5 different variants of the influenza virus. And we hope that those will cover enough of the different viruses that are coming in within flu season to give us the kind of protection. And so flu vaccines tend to have 40 to 50% efficacy in most years, and very rarely anything better than that. I've lost track of where the question came from. Sorry.
It's just comparing SARS, COVID.
Oh, SARS, MERS. Okay, so
MERS.
Again, the coronavirus, both SARS and SARS-CoV-2 basically target the same receptor. It's basically, we call it ACE2, but forget about what ACE2 is all about. But basically, it is relatively high within the bronchial tree, if you will. There's a lot of ACE2 receptors, whereas MERS tends to be further down. No, it's the other way around. SARS-CoV-2 is fairly deep. That's why we get the kind of disease, whereas MERS and SARS-1 basically, well, SARS and SARS-CoV-2 basically target the same receptor, whereas MERS targets a different receptor. That's basically the difference, but they're all coronaviruses. What else do you want to say about that? John, you want to go and have anything to add to that, or Eamon?
I don't know. My understanding is MERS, which is the Middle East respiratory virus, is more dangerous if you get it, but it's less transmissible.
That is also true.
It's pretty much confined to the Middle East, and I think it came from camels.
It did.
SARS was more dangerous if you got it, but again, I think it was less transmissible than COVID. So, I mean, the big thing with COVID is it's just so transmissible.
Yes, high transmissibility is very bad.
It is, yes, indeed. I was at UHN when we first had SARS, and I remember going literally from one department to the next, fully masked, and having my temperature taken probably, I don't know, 100 times a day.
I'm so grateful that this is not an influenza virus.
Me too.
Good to know. So I just have a question. I take blood pressure medication for proteinuria. Will the AstraZeneca vaccine affect my kidney function?
No.
COVID will.
Yes, exactly. This is an interesting one. What, in your professional opinion, is the best vaccine out there?
The first one that you were offered.
I take.
Sorry to be so blunt, but really, they're all very, very efficacious. Do not look at those published numbers from the phase 3 trials. Those are guidelines, and yes, that's what got them the kind of attention that they appropriately got from Health Canada and other countries' medical advisory committees. But all of them are very, very efficacious, and really, you would be doing yourself a significant disservice if you're waiting for the perfect vaccine. The best vaccine for you is the first one that's offered to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to remember is that because Pfizer and Moderna came out first, they are being tested against the original coronavirus. And since then, the coronavirus has become, obviously some of the variants have become more difficult. So it actually got a weaker enemy to fight against. So that's part of the reason why those 2 vaccines look good. I personally got the AstraZeneca vaccine 10 days ago because that's what was offered to me, and I took it and I'm happy. There's a great cartoon somewhere in which a guy is at the top of a waterfall just about to go over, and someone's throwing him a life raft, like a life buoy labeled AstraZeneca, and he says, "No, I think I'll wait for something better," and that pretty much sums it up.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Iman, did you want to add anything?
I agree 100%. And the most important thing everyone wants from a vaccine is we don't want to get very sick, don't want to end up in the hospital, and all of them will offer excellent protection that you want from that. And then that is also supported by the numbers, if you really like numbers, even though those numbers are not comparable across trials, because there's many reasons for that. It's like they were all made in different kitchens, but the end products is the same.
Okay. I have in the chat, will Pfizer protect against the new variants? And I guess I would ask that about all the vaccines.
All of the ones that are currently licensed in Canada will protect against the original virus. There's no argument about that. That's what they were tested against. Some of the new variants that are coming along, we don't know yet as to how protective they're going to be. It certainly seems right now that the mRNA, so that's the Pfizer and the Moderna, have quite a respectable level of protection against at least the known variants of concern. It looks like the AstraZeneca, at least in a very limited study, it was under 2,000 individuals in South Africa, looking at that particular variant, that the AstraZeneca did not have a good level of protection against mild disease. They are still looking at how well it's protected against serious disease and death. Everybody's anticipating that even the AstraZeneca, under those very constrained conditions, looking at a particular variant in and of itself. So again, recruiting individuals that were, again, receiving placebo and individuals that were receiving the vaccine. But again, it was a very small number of individuals under those very, very constrained conditions. They're anticipating that protection against serious disease and hospitalization will still be very, very high, even under those very constrained conditions. Having said that, the most common variant that we have here in Canada is the 117, which has been labeled as the so-called UK variant. I don't like referring to it as the UK variant. I'd rather people think of it as the 117 variant, but nevertheless, that is the variant that is the most dominant here in Canada and the rest of most of North America. We don't see an awful lot of the P1 variant or the 151 variant from, again, the so-called South African variant. So again, all of the vaccines that are currently licensed in Canada have a very high degree of efficacy against at least the dominant variants of concern, as well as the original virus.
All right, I see heads nodding. I don't see anybody want to jump in on that one.
Oh no, every time I'm like, everything has been said. That's awesome. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Yes. Well, I can't wait to, I can't wait to roll up my sleeve. Why Johnson & Johnson a 1 shot and the other require 2 shots?
That was a statement. I didn't hear a question.
Oh, sorry. Why is Johnson & Johnson a 1 shot and the others require 2?
A number of different reasons. Basically, both of those are using a DNA coupled to so DNA that's coding for the spike protein again, and they're coming in using an adenovirus vector, a crippled vector. So this isn't a live virus. This is not something that can in any way, shape, or form replicate. It's just there to, as a taxi service, if you will, to bring in the DNA into your cell so that the cell can make the protein. The amount of DNA that is, it's actually measured in the number of viral particles that are coming, because each viral particle will have a copy of the DNA, and the number of copies of the virus that are being, or copies of the adenovirus that are coming in is significantly lower in the AstraZeneca vaccine. It is about 5 times 10 to the 10. And for the Johnson & Johnson one, basically it's double that. It's like, it's 1 times 10 to the 11. So again, it's double the amount of original material coming in. Both of those, regardless of the dosing, have indicated that they are completely protective against both death and serious disease. So the question then becomes, well, do I want 1 dose or 2 doses? Well, what you want, presumably, is not to get sick. And both of those vaccines have clearly demonstrated a very, very high protection against disease and 100% protection against death. One of the good things about the Johnson & Johnson, however, which I think is really going to be advantageous for us here in Canada, where we have both individuals that are homeless and therefore difficult to track for that second dose, as well as communities in far-flung parts of the country. So again, if we have to, fly in vaccines into these far-flung communities, and we have a lot of those in the northern parts of Canada as well as in the Northern Territories, it would make an awful lot of sense if we only had to do that once, go into the community, vaccinate everybody, go out and go to the next community. So there's a lot of advantages for us here in Canada to have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine here because of the way our population is dispersed across the country, as well as dealing with, a significant homeless population, at least in the large urban centers. But in terms of the efficacy between the two, no, there isn't any. There really isn't a significant difference. Both of those vaccines, as well as the mRNA vaccines, are incredibly good at preventing serious disease, and all of them will prevent, from the studies so far, will prevent death at 100%.
Okay, thank you for that. That was a great answer and certainly takes into consideration our unique geography. Some questions I saw about the Prevnar vaccine, about how long in between. Is that, I know you answered, somebody answered with, rule of thumb was sort of 2 weeks with the shingles vaccine to wait. Is that sort of a rule of thumb for any other type of vaccine you might be getting, or is that?
There are certainly vaccines that we use here in Canada that are so-called multivalent, and I'm thinking here of MMR and a number of other vaccines that have a number of things on board at the same time, and those have obviously been tested to ensure that there is an adequate response to all of the parts of the vaccine. So it's not as if the immune system is incapable of dealing with multiple vaccines coming in at the same time, or multiple different antigens, if you will, coming in at the same time. Certainly the immune system deals with novel antigens all the time in large numbers. So it's not as if the immune system can't handle it. However, in a vaccine, you're also eliciting a number of different immunological and inflammatory responses. And it would not do you much good to have a much more broadly based inflammatory response, and then on top of that, inducing yet another inflammatory response. So again, basically what you want to do, vaccinate, deal with the various things that are going on in your body, allow that to wind down and become back to normal homeostasis. And then again, you can go ahead and vaccinate again. So again, it's not a matter of the immune system can't handle it. What you want to avoid is the overall generalized inflammatory response. You don't want to be boosting that over and over and over again, because that can in fact be deleterious and probably wouldn't feel very good either.
All right. Well, I think we are at the end of our time. I really appreciate your time tonight. I know that you all volunteered to do this and to, the work you do to help people who are vaccine hesitant and just aren't sure. So it really is an incredible public service. I know our participants tonight enjoyed this, and we'll record it and share it on our Unifor YouTube channel. So I know our first panel has had lots of views. And again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. There's lots of thanks in the column and in the chat for all of you. So
I would add to that an invitation to have questions sent to, we meet every single night between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock. I'm sure that after some rumination, new questions might arise for people. Do not feel in any way, shape, or form hesitant to fire those up to the panel, either a regular 8 to 10 o'clock panel or some other time, or in fact through email or whatever. I would just invite people that to feel free to ask additional questions. I realize that this was very concentrated and there may be a bit of information overload for people. So once they've had time to think about it, to be more than happy to answer questions in the future.
Yes, I think everybody is very appreciative of this, and we will make sure that everybody has the link and the information to pass on any further questions that they have. So good night, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.